President Trump reassures farmers and ranchers as Nebraskans visit the White House. Ahead on Grow, reaction from Governor Ricketts as Nebraska leaders talk trade and ethanol with the president. Plus, the legislature fails to act on property tax reform. We'll talk about what happens next. And this up and down weather, what's next as planting approaches? Regina has a spring outlook ahead on Grow. Farm state leaders press the White House on top agriculture issues. But first, the Nebraska legislature fails to act on property taxes. Senator Kurt Friesen was among 8 senators who tried to hash out a deal. As a farmer, he says there's a shift, with property taxes taking on a bigger share of school funding. He wanted to expand sales tax if it helps, but that's a non-starter with the governor. The governor's plan, though, didn't have the votes. And now Governor Pete Ricketts fires back after some lawmakers call for a special session. The governor says if senators want to raise other taxes in order to achieve property tax relief, he is opposed. Meanwhile, the state's largest farm group says the need for tax relief remains. Steve Nelson of Farm Bureau says he's disappointed there was no deal.
We entered the session optimistic that we could get something done. There were a lot of people interested in doing something. There were a number of bills that came before legislative committees with different options to deal with property tax relief, and a lot of people working very, very hard to get something done. But in the end, we weren't able to come up with the 33 votes that were needed to move legislation. So again, as I said, we're very disappointed, but we will continue to work to find solutions because solutions are needed.
And some of you say the legislature should go back to summer school. Our poll question finds the majority give the legislature failing grades on their handling of tax relief. Most responding to our Twitter poll say they deserve a D or an F on the issue. Those results are not scientific, but I have to tell you, this is one of the biggest responses we've ever had. It seems to have struck a nerve. The week's other big story was in Washington as President Trump met with leaders from ag states, including Governor Pete Ricketts and Senators Deb Fischer and Ben Sasse. One of the big topics, China, along with those tariffs and what it all means.
China has consistently treated the United States agriculture unfairly. I was very proud of something I did at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. I had President Xi, who's a friend of mine, who's a very, very good man. And I don't blame China. I blame our representatives, that our people over the past, our presidents and negotiators and trade representatives, that they allowed this to happen.
More things than just the back and forth with China were on the table. One of those could be huge for Nebraska's ag industry, an increase in ethanol across the country throughout the year.
The takeaway I had is the president was listening, and he has the backs of farmers and ranchers. He understands how important it is to get these markets open. That's his goal as well. He talked about making E15 something that we could have and doing it year-round. He talked about his willingness to look at the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership to open up additional markets, and by and large really was there to say he's got the back of the American farmer and rancher.
The call from ethanol supporters doesn't stop at E15, though. Governor Ricketts says he's also asked President Trump to have the EPA stop handing out waivers to refineries when it comes to the renewable fuel standard.
That really, one of the things I expressed to the president, that we need to ask the EPA to stop doing that. And I think it is one of those things that is a balance out there, as the president talked about trying to help some of the smaller refineries. But if we could get that E15 standard in place, then that would help tremendously with our demand for ethanol.
Senator Ben Sasse also let his voice be heard this week. He says it looks like the U.S. may be getting back in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would be huge for Nebraska's farmers and ranchers.
The big headline coming out of this meeting is that the president said he was deputizing Larry Kudlow and Ambassador Lighthizer to look at re-entering the TPP negotiations. The president multiple times reaffirmed in general to all of us and looked right at Larry Kudlow and said, Larry, go get it done.
Senator Deb Fischer says she came away from the meeting happy, saying, quote, I'm encouraged by the president's desire to move forward with the sale of year-round E15 with a RVP waiver and to re-engage with TPP nations in discussions to open new markets. I will continue to press this case for the people of Nebraska." End quote. Congressman Adrian Smith also weighing in on the E15 move, saying, quote, "This is a decision which will allow greater access to cleaner and more affordable fuel options throughout the year, while also benefiting Nebraska agriculture as various ethanol blends become more widely available." End quote. Also this week, President Trump calling the nation's farmers patriots, promising they will be better off under his farm policy. Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue says he realizes farmers are definitely caught up in the middle of things.
And he knows that agriculture is very vulnerable in trade disputes because it's often the tip of the spear in any kind of retaliatory action. And our farmers, frankly, brought that on themselves. They're so productive that we have a surplus of ag exports across the country. So anytime there are any trade disputes, they're always the one that are picked on. They also punch above their weight politically, as you members probably know.
From politics now to planting season. Sure hasn't felt like that much with the snow we've had. Of course, it was 70 just a couple of days ago. We caught up with Extension educator Jenny Reese to talk about planting conditions to avoid replanting. Well, Jenny, here we are, Friday the 13th. By the time people are seeing this, we're going to have snow on the ground. I'm sure you're thankful that we haven't really seen a lot of planters going through the field at this point.
I am grateful for that, Steve. What I'm grateful for is that farmers have been paying attention to the message that both Extension and our industry partners have been sharing, and that is we really would like them to wait on planting until soil temperatures are around 50 degrees, and then also looking at the next 48 hours. So what are the conditions that are going to allow for those soil temperatures to stay around 50 degrees or increase in the next 48 hours? I think our farmers have learned a lot in the last few years regarding when they put seed in the ground in less than optimal soil conditions, that it's not a wise decision.
You know, every year is unique. You know, here we are right around April 15th, and we're dealing with freezing temperatures and snow. It's a unique way to start out the season.
Yeah, every year is different. Every year brings different challenges, but it still is early. I mean, we are talking, it's April 13th today, so.
All right, well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve.
So what about you or the farmers you know? Soybean planting is the subject of this week's poll question. We want to know when you put those soybeans in the ground. Do you wait until all the corn is done? Do you get some of the beans started while you're working on corn at the same time? Or do you start with soybeans or something else? Log on and follow us on Twitter. All votes are anonymous. There's certainly been some field work, although it has been somewhat limited. In terms of crop conditions, winter wheat rates mostly fair to good. Farmers have started to plant oats, but that is well behind schedule. While farmers are certainly mindful of those trade and tariff issues, another policy issue is immigration. And a new study says the loss of immigrant labor could certainly hurt the pork industry. Economists with Iowa State based their findings on a study from the USDA. They found a loss of foreign-born workforce because of change in immigration policy would not be offset by U.S. citizens.
Reducing access or restricting access to that supply of workers would have ripple effects throughout the rural economy. By not only increasing production costs for producers, but ultimately it would increase food prices for consumers.
The results, researchers say, could be a reduction of 3.4 to 5.5% of the total number of farm workers, and that could have major implications for farmers and non-farmers alike.
In the U.S. right now, we have a 4.1% unemployment rate. That's a 17-year low. In a lot of these rural communities where pork production takes place, the labor market is even tighter. So a domestic workforce simply doesn't exist for a lot of these types of jobs.
The National Pork Producers Council commissioned the study. They say it has become one of the top issues pork farmers have asked for help with since the 2016 election. Snow and earthquakes in the same week. Earthquakes were felt in Custer County this past week near Arnold, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, ranging from 3.7 to 2.5 on the Richter scale. We spoke with a mom who felt the shake.
So my first thought was, who's falling off of what and where, because it just rumbled, but then it kept rumbling. And so my daughter and I looked at each other kind of like, oh, another earthquake. And it was shaking the jars, the dishes in the kitchen. And then it was just kind of over. And then there was kind of another bump, kind of like it had another little bump in its system.
From 75 to snow, it's sure been a wild one. The calendar tells us it's spring. What's the spring outlook hold? Regina's got a special Grow interview next.